Welcome to Inside Politics, our weekly podcast on a handful of things you need to know about San Antonio politics. I'm Molly Smith, a City Hall reporter at the San Antonio Express-News. I'm joined today by our county government reporter, Saul Pink.
Hello.
And our special guest, political consultant, Andrew Solano.
Hey,
Welcome back. It's been a while.
It has been, yeah.
I think we last saw you pre-Spurs election.
I think it was, yeah. I miss you guys.
Yeah, we missed you too. Now we can have you back. You're no longer working a campaign.
Yeah, and can I just say we miss Greg? Greg, wherever you are.
Yes, Greg is on vacation.
Yeah.
He'll be back here next week, though, for all his fans.
All right.
We're recording this on Tuesday, December 9th, so a couple hours after the candidate filing deadline closed for the March primaries. We want to start by talking about Congressional District 35. This was one of 5 districts that Texas Republicans redrew over the summer to give their party an electoral edge. You were among a handful of consultants who said that the seat could still be winnable for Democrats. It's now anchored in San Antonio's southeast side and includes Guadalupe, Karnes, and Wilson County. Based on which candidates filed, though, for the Democratic primary, do you still think that's the case, that Democrats can hold this seat?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough. I think it would have been tough either way. I still think it is winnable. A lot of things have to go right. I think what we've seen across the country in other congressional races, we just saw a special in Tennessee. It seems like the swing has been, plus 10 in some of those. Even that race the Democrat lost, it was a plus 22, I think, for Trump, and she ended up only losing by 8 or 9. And so I think if you look at what this looks like in this district now, compared to what it was, it's still a plus Trump district. But I do think at the end of the day, the right candidate getting in there at the right time with the right team and resources could still win it. But it's going to definitely be an uphill battle.
And it's worth noting on the Democratic side, probably the biggest names are John Lira, a former congressional candidate for District 28, and then Johnny Garcia, who's a spokesperson for the Sheriff's Department.
Yeah.
I know there was a lot of kind of pressure for Beto Altamirano. You managed his mayoral campaign. There was pressure from the DCCC for him to run. Why did he decide to kind of sit it out? And why do you think kind of other kind of big names didn't jump for the seat?
Yeah, well, look, I think first and foremost, it's a big decision for anybody, right? And hats off to the candidates who filed, especially in this political environment, right? People who want to go run for office. It takes a special type of person. And I think for Beto, there's a lot that he has going on right now. And I think, it's all about timing. I think for anybody who's looking to get into this race, and perhaps why no other notable Dems jumped in, was just because they know that this seat is unlikely to stay in this same boundary the next time. The Supreme Court, we've already seen weigh in on this one and say just for this election, that they're going to stay with these Republican drawn boundaries, but it's likely to change. So within the next 2 years, the next time up, it's likely going to look like something else, and so it may only be a temporary seat for someone. So you go spend all those resources, the time and energy, just to lose because it got gerrymandered even further.
And then why do you think Greg Casar, who currently holds this seat under its previous boundaries where it's anchored in Austin, decided to run for 37 instead? Lloyd Doggett's seat. Yeah. Doggett decided to retire. Kind of why do you think, what was kind of the strategy there of Casar not deciding to try to kind of hold on to the seat?
Yeah, look, I'll preface this with that I worked for Congressman Doggett for about 2 years as his district director here in San Antonio. And so, I will give the benefit of the doubt to Congressman Casar and his team. Obviously, changing a district is difficult, right? And he does reside in Austin, as does Congressman Doggett. And so we had those, the Fajita district, as everyone called it for years, one of the worstly, gerrymandered districts, in the country, that brought those folks into San Antonio. And so, I think people were used to that. But now having the district just be centered in Austin and in San Antonio, it was going to be difficult for Congressman Casar to run in a city that he didn't reside in at all, right? There is you live outside of the district a little in congressional seats. You don't have to, by law, live in the district, but, a few streets is one thing, but not even in the same county is quite different. But I will say it's a huge loss to the Texas Democratic Party, losing Congressman Doggett. He's been a staple in every district he's been put in. The joke around here was that as long as they didn't district him north, right, he'd gone all the way to the border, through San Antonio, all the way out to Houston. And it's a really big loss with his leadership. But I know he's still going to be involved in the community. But I do think at the end of the day, it would have been my preference, right, for Congressman Kassar to continue to run in this district because he's the incumbent. It would have probably made it easier than having some of these other Dems jump in. But at the end of the day, I understand, his perspective.
There are a number of Republicans vying for the seat. Among them, who do you think kind of has the best shot of winning the Republican primary?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rep. Lujan obviously has thrown his hat in. It was essentially drawn for him. I do think that, if you look at his current district to state house and what this seat looks like, it's pretty obvious. And so, there's a lot of folks on that side, right? A lot of money is going to be spent, but I do think that he has the support of the governor, and likely, the Trump orbit. So it's going to be very difficult. Obviously, Commissioner Moody didn't jump in. I think that would have been another big one had we seen that. But I think it's Rep. Lujan's to lose. And it's going to be, a tough battle. But again, even that might be a temporary seat. So we don't know. It's just you see what the Supreme Court has done, what Trump has done, but the national numbers, what they look like, that's going to probably be a blue wave. It's just a question: is it going to be enough to outlast and outspend Rep. Lujan?
I know that we were kind of waiting until yesterday to see what Commissioner Moody would do. Yeah. He kind of wavered back and forth. What did he kind of say in the statement? He said he was
prioritizing spending time with his family, and that a congressional run would take away from that time. So he's going to stick with his seat.
Yeah.
But I'm curious whether you think he missed out on a good opportunity here, or whether it was the safe bet to stay out.
Yeah, I mean, look, it kind of pains me, but I think it was a safe bet. I mean, I think similar to Beto, I think we're so used to these, 10-year cycles of redistricting, but now the new normal seems to be like every cycle. And so it's difficult, right, to give up a seat that you've spent a lot of time, and you've got a staff. Rep. Moody has Commissioner Moody has a terrific staff that do a lot of good work for his precinct. And so, saying that you're going to leave that, I believe on the county side, you have to vacate immediately.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that also probably factored into it's not just him leaving like some other seats. Like there's a lot that would have to have happened since then. So I think ultimately I thought he was probably unlikely to jump in.
Do you see him jumping in, though, down the road as someone that we will see on a congressional ballot?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think in terms of what a conservative in San Antonio, he's kind of in that same mold, right? And so, I think we will definitely see him in the future. Again, depending on what that seat looks like in the next 2 years, I would definitely see him eyeing it.
So let's move on to another big local election coming up, and that's the Democratic primary for Bexar County Judge.
Yeah.
Of course, you have former Mayor Ron Nirenberg challenging the incumbent County Judge Peter Sakai. Sakai's finishing up his first term here. And I think, people might have trouble pointing to major accomplishments that he can flex in the campaign. At the same time, I think people also have trouble pointing to kind of major mistakes and vulnerabilities. What will it take for Nirenberg to oust Peter Sakai here?
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to likability. Always, Ron was incredibly likable. We saw it during this past campaign in November on the Project Marvel Spurs arena, that they both came out ultimately. And I think they both, certainly had some responsibility in that in different ways. But it was interesting to see, what on the ground, what the response was to both of them. And I think they certainly have their camps. I think they certainly both have a body of work. And we're lucky to have, I know it's not ideal, right? The Democrat on Democrat in these primaries, most would rather not see it. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the record of both. And again, Ron was incredibly popular when he left office. And it's going to be interesting to see how they distance themselves from one another and try to stake out positions that are maybe different. Most voters are going to want to see outside of their camps, right? Outside of the diehard Judge Sakai fans and the diehard Ron fans, who's in the middle that they can look at and what are some of the positions that they've taken. I think for Ron, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, towards the end of his administration, he really focused on the national and elevated himself in Democratic politics, right? Had that results been different, he could be in DC right now, right, in a cabinet position or something. And so I think he did a lot to, do well with the local Democratic Party. And so the precinct chairs, all that machine, it's going to be interesting to see really where they are. I'll be looking at, where are those precinct chairs? Where are the other elected offices? Are they going to pick a side? It's going to be really difficult. I know fundraising is going to be a challenge. Obviously, they don't have the same caps that city council does. And so I'm sure Ron and his team will appreciate that, right? Because it's different. There is no cap on the county side. And so I'm going to look at fundraising a lot, but there's going to be a lot of people similar on the mayor's race when you had 27 candidates who are going to say, hey, I'm going to stay out, or I'm just going to give both a little versus actually taking a side. I mean, that's one thing we saw in all of the past recent elections is that when you have these type of races, it becomes very difficult for people who have some type of buy-in with these candidates to really come out and say, I'm with this person.
So where then does someone like Ron Nirenberg, who's at a disadvantage with fundraising, he was sitting on, not a lot of money. 7,000. Sakai's sitting on over 400,000.
Yeah.
Given kind of that, people want to either donate to both or sit out, where does someone like Ron Nirenberg go to kind of look to quickly build up his campaign account to match Sakai? Yeah,
I mean, I think there's certainly going to be an issue, but again, because it's not, you don't have the same caps that you do at council, I think it'll be a lot easier. I would probably say it's next to impossible if this were on the council side. But because you can raise, no limit on that money, there are benefactors and others, outside of San Antonio, the county, the state who are willing to probably put into that. You're going to see PACs, right? We saw that during the mayoral stuff, elections. And so I think it's not ideal again, but I don't think it's going to be the type of hurdle that some people expect because Ron's always been a good fundraiser. And I think people were just waiting to see if he was going to get in officially. And then they'll start putting those together pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. So we're obviously still 3 months from the election, but in the little we've seen from Nirenberg's campaign so far in these early stages is a message that's kind of centered around the role of the county judge. He's talked a lot about how the county judge is being like the mayor of the county and how it's not a quote unquote judicial position, seemingly a reference to Peter Sakai's past as a courtroom judge. It's talked about consolidating county programs with city programs and so on. Is that an effective pitch for Democratic voters right now in this upcoming election?
Look, TBD on whether it's effective or not. I do think it's, again, as I said earlier, trying to figure out a way to differentiate themselves from one another, I think is smart because I think to most casual viewers of this or voters, there's not a whole lot of daylight between them. Substantive, right? I mean, obviously you have age and, other stuff. But in terms of like policy, they're going to have to figure out pretty quickly. Like, I think most people are going to look back to see at the Arena, Project Marvel. They weren't really different on that, right? They both supported it. And so what are those big ticket items that they disagree on more than they agree on? And so I think pointing some of that out is going to be smart. But also, of course, I think probably highlighting his time as mayor and the difficulties maybe that between the city and county is smart. But it's very difficult. Some of this stuff's in the weeds, right? And really like insider baseball type stuff. And so trying to figure out really, succinct ways to explain how his time as mayor can help him in his time as judge, I think is really smart. It's just trying to figure out what's the best way to say it.
How do you think Project Marvel or the Spurs Arena, if at all, are going to play a role in this race? And I know that they both supported the Spurs Arena, but Sakai at various kind of county town halls has repeatedly said, tried to distance himself from Project Marvel, saying this is a city project, the county has nothing to do with it. I mean, do you see Sakai trying to play on some voter dissatisfaction with Project Marvel?
No, because it passed. I think ultimately,
or the Spurs Arena passed, which you see as a
correct
passage of Project Marvel,
as
a the broader sports.
Well, the county's portion certainly, right? So the county's portion it passed. I think it might be a lot different had it failed. But again, both of them going in supported it, and so I think now looking at it, no, I think it passed, and now people are expecting the next steps, right? And I think both of them are going to have to obviously play a role in that. And again, I think Ron talking about his time as mayor because now it's the city's part, right, in the coming months on these next steps as it proceeds into the larger discussion right around the arena. But no, the fact that it passed, I think for both of them, they have to own that. And it could be very different had it failed. But I think the community is showing the support that they did in passing the county's portion, allowing the city to proceed. I think, again, Ron and his team will be looking at ways to talk about that since it started on his watch.
I'm curious your thoughts on endorsements in this race. Nirenberg quickly picked up the endorsement of Sakai's predecessor, County Judge Nelson Wolf. Sakai, on the other hand, quickly got backing from the union that represents sheriff's deputies, the union representing San Antonio firefighters. What endorsements actually move voters in a race like this?
Look, I got in trouble last time on this podcast for talking about endorsements. And the irony was that I was agreeing with folks, which is I don't think they matter too much. I mean, obviously, the one that we got tossed around a lot on Bethel's race was Judge Wolf as well. And ultimately, we came up short, right? I think it's incredibly, we were honored to have it and to continue to have his support. But ultimately, I don't think it's necessarily it weighs as much on voters. I think it's more of an insider thing. Certainly, you'd rather have them than not have them. Right. And I do think it's more notable that the lack of endorsements that have come out, right? Again, I think people still wanted to see whether or not Ron was actually going to do it. But, I think you would rather have a lineup of a bunch of people, behind you flanked at the courthouse or something, But I think it's notable that there's only a handful so far who have been willing to come out and support. I expect more in the future, but I don't think it matters that much.
Do you think that San Antonio Mayor Gina Ortiz Jones will take a position?
It's a great question. I don't know. I think if you look at past history, it's been very difficult. I can't think off the top of my head too often for a sitting mayor or judge and vice versa to come out for one another, especially in this environment when you just don't know. So, not that anyone's asking me or for my advice, but, I come from the school of Lloyd Doggett, which is, you don't endorse in primaries.
Also, on the county judge race, we should note that yesterday, conservative activist Patrick Von Dolan, who ran for Council District 9 in the past, filed as the GOP's lone candidate for the race.
All right. Good luck.
Just a final question. How much do you think a race like this, Nirenberg-Sakai, for the Democratic primary might cost?
Oh, man. We've seen the numbers steadily increase. I think that's a larger conversation just about, ways to reach voters. I think it's an interesting dichotomy between how much a race costs, but then also like what that gets you, which is the attention of voters, right? And you want to reach as many voters as possible. I think that's the point of democracy, trying to get as many people involved, and it costs money. So obviously, from my perspective and the work that I've done is primarily on the outreach side and the actual voter contact, right? Whether that's block walking or hosting events. All that stuff takes time, money, and resources. And then you have the digital and all that. So that's a long way of saying it's going to be very expensive, easily exceeding $1 million plus on the judge's race.
And when does that kind of race, when will it begin in earnest? When can voters kind of really expect to start hearing from these candidates?
Yeah, again, attention spans, right? So right now is not an ideal time because of the holidays. But you're probably going to see some holiday greeting cards coming out, some family pictures, I can imagine. And then in earnest, I would imagine, the official kickoff probably, even though they have a very strict policy of no politicking, but is the MLK March. Everyone's going to want to be there and be seen and be visible. Obviously, the goal there is to respect the holiday and what it meant and what it means to the East Side and bringing people together. But certainly in the background, looming is going to be a lot of these races who at that point is just, 90 days away.
And then for our last topic, we want to get your thoughts on a municipal issue. This is Mayor Jones's push to move municipal elections from May to November of odd years. This is something that the legislature kind of quietly passed a bill that allowed the city of Dallas to do it, would allow other cities. The mayor has said she said she just found out about this a couple weeks ago. She was reading news coverage of Dallas doing this, and she said she wished city staff had flagged this item for council when the legislative session closed out over the summer. The city manager has said his team wasn't notified of it because it wasn't a priority issue. You've worked in City Hall for many years. Does that track for you, or does it sound like someone kind of dropped the ball and this issue should have been on everyone's radar months before?
Yeah, I totally understand why. It's one of those, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. There are too many bills. I understand, they have a large team, Jeff Coyle and his team who do a great job of tracking. These often get their, marching orders from council. There's a intergovernmental relations committee. I'm not sure if that still exists now, but certainly in the past, there was a chair of that committee on council who got feedback from council members. I also think it's just a victim for this council and the mayor of when they get into office, which I think plays into the question of moving it in the first place. One of the benefits that I see, because I do support the move, is that you get in with a longer runway to actually learn, because it's incredibly difficult. And I think you can point to this very issue of right when the ledge is convening. Now it's normal to have special sessions. And so you're going to have council members often getting into office around the same time. They're trying to learn the ropes. And if it happens to be during a legislative session year at the state, you now have them trying to pay attention to that. So I think it also points to something that many people may not think is too important, which is staffing. Just for anybody, right? Having staff who can have some continuity there, some institutional knowledge, I think helps in these cases. But I could totally understand why, the staff wouldn't have necessarily flagged this one. I certainly in the past, I know this issue has come up about moving the date. Mayor Nirenberg, who I know was at the press conference the other day in support, had talked about this with some of the charter review commissions in the past. So it's been on the radar, but I think mostly those were talked about in even years, not necessarily the odd ones. And so I think it's frustrating. I'm sure I can understand why the mayor having to find it herself, and as she has talked about, but I also understand why staff wouldn't necessarily have flagged this one, because if you flag this one, you probably have to flag hundreds of other ones just on the chance that someone might want to. It becomes incredibly difficult.
You've worked a lot of campaigns over the years. Why do you personally kind of support this move to November of odd years versus this May election?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I do support it, and I think not for the reasons most people would think. I want to be clear. I think the notion and possibility alone that it could increase turnout is important and should be enough, right? But I do want to point out to the fact that I think there is some confusion around the odd and even. This is what would allow for a move to November in the odd years, which past trends have shown that the numbers are actually lower in those November elections, and slightly more conservative probably on the whole. But again, I think studies, as the mayor and others have talked about, have shown that moving to November regardless is going to increase turnout. So I think that's notable. And shouldn't be overlooked. But I do think some of the other more practical ones, having gone through a mayoral election in this past one and having to deal with Fiesta, I think was just, if no one ever has to do that again, it'll be too soon. As the mayor said the other day at the press conference, just having to choose for most residents, they chose Fiesta. It's not even a question. We saw what the numbers were. There were probably more people that enjoyed Fiesta, all things considered, and all the events at NIOSA and the parades than actually voted. And so I say that jokingly, but I mean, it really is true. And then also we shouldn't overlook the fact that in a time of, deficits, $1 million is not nothing. So I know there's still some questions about what that looks like, but I think at the end of the day, saving any large amount of funds, right, that can go to something else, or when you're looking at large deficits, you're trying to look under the couch cushion and trying to find anything you can. So $1 million is significant in that regard. So I think those three things alone, right, increase turnout, even though I will, let people know it may not be necessarily the first thing that happens. I don't want people to freak out if this passes and all of a sudden the turnout isn't doubled. I think it's going to take some time. But again, not having to deal with Fiesta and that. But I will say I do have concerns with school districts. I think in the past what we've seen, turnout for school districts is really important. We've seen a couple of high-profile bond issues and other school-related items fail, and removing the city's elections from that time means it's likely going to have even lower turnout in May, which it's going to have some repercussions. So you got to sometimes, think about those unintended consequences.
The council's going to debate this kind of publicly for the first time, this proposal tomorrow. It's not yet on an agenda to vote. They have until December 31st to decide whether to approve this. But I'm curious where you kind of see the council members falling on this issue, and if the mayor will be able to get 5 members to side with her to make this change actually happen.
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question. I would say this is probably an issue that should be a slam dunk. Under normal circumstances. It's been pretty quiet at City Hall, according to your coverage. And so I don't know, I've talked to some of my former colleagues and just kind of what I've seen reported. It sounds like the votes are probably there, but I would cautious folks because I do think there's an argument about how quickly the turnaround is. I know, what others have said, including the mayor, about, the time it took for, the town halls and the community input sessions for other large projects. But I do think, you want to have input. I know District 7, Councilwoman Marina Gavito had an event recently. I know other offices are trying to get feedback as quickly as possible. So I think it's going to be a hard issue to not support. I would imagine if there is any opposition, I don't know exactly what it would be along the lines of, other than like needing more time. But ultimately, I think I don't think we're going to see too much opposition.
For our last question, if the mayor can't get the votes, and this doesn't move forward, how damaging would that be to her? And then also vice versa, if she gets the votes, is this a really kind of important win to kind of close out the year on? I mean, how critical is this for her?
Yeah. Look, I think any win at this point is going to be well earned and important, right? Because they've been far and few between. And so I think losing it, I think it'll just be a forced error. I don't know exactly what behind the scenes it's looked like in terms of trying to get support. I've seen publicly, look, again, no one's asking me, but I think ideally here, having lined up council support, and it sounds like some of that has happened. Mm-hmm. I don't know to what extent, but it sounds like that's happening. But there's also some of the PR stuff that's going on. And I think that can be problematic sometimes. Is
that like the press conference she had yesterday with voting rights groups?
Yeah, I mean, not just the press conference. I think showing support is important, right? In this case, and there was a lot of it. So I think that's also, you want to display that. There was a lot of organizations, former mayors, former judges who were there. So I think that was a good idea. But I just think, debating some of this publicly, right? Calling into question about the city piece of it, or, telling council members who have questions about it, that they didn't have questions when other, just that kind of stuff. For me, I guess maybe I'm just old school, and trying to get some of that stuff taken care of behind the scenes. But maybe the environment has just changed and that's not how it works anymore. And this is how it's done. But I will say if it fails, I think, it's not going to be the end of the world. But I certainly think it's going to be an unforced error. And I think a win's a win. So you take them where you can. I
guess we will see what happens over the next kind of week and a half.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you hopefully soon.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining us. If you haven't already done so, and haven't signed up for our weekly politics newsletter, go to the show notes and subscribe, and we will see you back in a week.